My name is Margaret Rose Sullivan. I am 68 years old, a retired school teacher, and I have lived my entire life here in Charleston, South Carolina, where the magnolias bloom and secrets grow deep roots. What I'm about to share with you today is the most devastating truth I've ever had to face. It's a story about a mother's love, a sister's envy, and a deception so profound that it reshaped my entire understanding of who I am. I spent 45 years believing a lie about my own identity, and when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just break my heart. It shattered the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family. If you've ever discovered that your whole life was built on someone else's secret, leave a like for this weary heart of mine. Subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss the next stories I'll share with all my love, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from and what time it is there. Has someone you trusted ever hidden something that changed everything? I love knowing which cities you're from and what part of your day you're spending with me.
I was born in Charleston in 1958, in a modest house on Rutledge Avenue with a wraparound porch and a garden full of camellias. My mother, or the woman I called Mother, was Dorothy Sullivan, a seamstress known throughout the neighborhood for her delicate handwork. My father, Robert Sullivan, worked at the shipyard, coming home each evening smelling of salt water and honest labor. We weren't wealthy, but we had Sunday dinners with pot roast and sweet potato casserole. We had laughter echoing through those old rooms. And we had what I believed was love. I was raised as an only child, or so I thought for most of my life. My parents told me I was their miracle baby, born after years of trying, after my mother had suffered multiple miscarriages. They said I was their answered prayer, their precious gift. I grew up believing I was deeply wanted, deeply loved, the center of their universe. My mother kept a baby book with every milestone documented. My first smile, my first word, my first step. She told me stories about the day I was born, how my father cried tears of joy, how she held me and promised to give me everything she never had. But there was always something in my mother's eyes when she looked at me. A sadness I couldn't name. A distance I couldn't bridge no matter how hard I tried. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear her crying in her bedroom, soft sobs muffled by a pillow. When I asked my father about it, he would pat my head and say, "Your mama has a tender heart, sweetheart." That's all. I was a studious child, always with my nose in a book. I loved school, loved learning, loved the way words could transport you to different worlds. My mother encouraged this, buying me books from the second-hand store, sitting with me while I read aloud. She taught me to sew, to cook, to keep a proper house. She taught me that a woman's reputation was her most valuable possession, that secrets were sometimes necessary, that some truths were better left buried. Looking back now, I see she was teaching me the very lessons she had lived by, the art of keeping silent about things that hurt too much to speak aloud. When I was 16, something happened that should have made me question everything, but I was too young, too trusting to see the signs. It was the summer before my junior year of high school. My father's sister, Aunt Caroline, came to visit from Savannah. She was a striking woman, tall and elegant, with the same auburn hair I had, the same green eyes. During dinner one evening, she looked at me across the table and said something strange. "My goodness, Dorothy, she looks so much like." And then she stopped, her face going pale. My mother stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. The rest of the visit was tense, awkward. Aunt Caroline left 2 days early, and I never saw her again. She died of a heart attack 3 years later. I asked my mother what Aunt Caroline had been about to say. My mother's hands were trembling as she washed the dinner dishes. "Nothing, baby," she said without turning around. "Your aunt always did have a habit of speaking before thinking. Pay it no mind." But I minded. The moment lived in the back of my mind for years. A small seed of doubt I didn't know how to name. I met Thomas Mitchell when I was 19 years old, in my sophomore year at the College of Charleston. He was studying business. I was studying literature and education. We met at a campus coffee shop where I was reading Virginia Woolf, and he asked if he could share my table. He had kind brown eyes and a gentle smile that made me feel safe. We married 2 years later in a simple ceremony at the Presbyterian Church, with my mother dabbing her eyes throughout the entire service. My mother seemed almost relieved when I got married, as if she was passing along a burden she could no longer carry. During the wedding preparations, she kept saying things like, "Now you'll have your own family, your own life." At the time, I thought she was just being sentimental about her only daughter leaving home. But there was something else in her voice, something like freedom, like release. Thomas and I settled into a small house in Mount Pleasant, just across the Cooper River. He started working at his father's insurance company, and I began teaching English at the local high school. We wanted children right away, but it took us 5 years before I finally got pregnant with our daughter, Emily. Those were hard years, filled with disappointment and doctor's visits, with my mother patting my hand and saying, "Some things just take time, sweetheart. Some things are meant to happen when they're meant to happen." When Emily was born, my mother held her with trembling hands and cried. Not tears of joy, but deep, wrenching sobs that scared me. "Mama, what's wrong?" I asked, frightened that something was wrong with the baby. She shook her head, unable to speak, and handed Emily back to me before rushing from the hospital room. My father followed her, and when he returned an hour later, he simply said, "She's overwhelmed with happiness. You know how emotional she gets." 3 years later, I had my son, Daniel. Again, my mother cried those same terrible tears. Again, my father made the same excuse. But this time I noticed something else. When my mother looked at my children, really looked at them, her face held an expression of such profound grief that it made my chest ache. It was as if she were looking at something she had lost, something she could never get back. The years passed in a comfortable rhythm. I taught my students about Fitzgerald and Hemingway. Thomas built his career. Emily and Daniel grew from babies into children, then teenagers. My parents aged. My father developed diabetes, then heart problems. My mother became quieter, more withdrawn, spending hours in her garden, tending her flowers with a devotion that bordered on obsession. It was during those years that I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. Small things that individually meant nothing, but together formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. There were no photographs of my mother pregnant. None. I had asked about this once when I was pregnant with Emily, wanting to compare our experiences. My mother said the photos were lost in a flood that damaged their basement years ago. But there had never been a flood. I knew this because my father had mentioned it. Our basement had always been dry, one of the reasons they'd bought the house. There was no record of my birth at Charleston Memorial Hospital, where my mother claimed I was born. I discovered this by accident when I was helping my daughter Emily with a genealogy project for school. We went to the hospital's records department, and they had no record of a Dorothy Sullivan giving birth in February 1958. The woman at the desk suggested perhaps it was a different hospital. Perhaps the records were incomplete. I accepted her explanation, but it gnawed at me. My mother didn't know how to answer basic questions about my birth. What time was I born? She would say morning, then evening, then change it again. How much did I weigh? The number changed every time. What was the weather like that day? She couldn't remember. For a woman who claimed I was her miracle baby, her answered prayer, she remembered remarkably few details about the most important day of her life. And then there was the box I found when I was 35 years old, cleaning out my parents' attic after my father suffered his first heart attack. It was a small cedar box, pushed far back into a corner, covered in dust. Inside were letters. Dozens of letters, all addressed to my mother, all from a woman named Catherine Sullivan. The same last name, but I had never heard of her. I had never heard my parents mention anyone named Catherine. The letters were heartbreaking. They were please let me see her. I think about her every day. Does she ask about me? I'm getting better now. The doctors say I'm well. Please, Dorothy, she's my daughter too. My hands shook as I read them. My daughter. Catherine was claiming to be someone's mother. But whose? The letters were dated from 1958 to 1975. Then they stopped abruptly. I looked for envelopes, for return addresses, but they had all been torn off. I confronted my mother that same day. I brought the box to her house and set it on her kitchen table while she was making sweet tea. "Mama, who is Catherine Sullivan?" The glass pitcher slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. Sweet tea and broken glass spread across the linoleum like a flood. My mother stood frozen, staring at the box as if it were a snake coiled to strike. "Where did you find that?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "In the attic." "Mama, who is Catherine? Why is she writing about her daughter? Why does she have our last name?" My mother's legs gave out. She collapsed into a kitchen chair, her face drained of all color. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice I had never heard before, defeated, ancient, broken, she said, "Catherine is your father's younger sister. And those letters are about you." The world tilted. "What do you mean, about me?" "Margaret, she stopped, pressed her hands to her face. "I never wanted you to know. I promised myself you would never have to know. Know what, Mama? What are you talking about? She lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, filled with 45 years of tears she had never shed. Catherine is your mother, baby. Your real mother. I couldn't have children. The miscarriages, they were real, but they destroyed something inside me. The doctors said I would never carry a baby to term. Your father and I, we were devastated. And then Catherine got pregnant, and she was so young, only 17, and she wasn't well, not in her mind. She had episodes. The doctors said it was a nervous condition. And when you were born, she couldn't take care of you. She could barely take care of herself. So we took you. We raised you as our own. We gave you the life Catherine never could. I couldn't breathe. The kitchen swam before my eyes. You're lying. I'm not lying, sweetheart. I wish to God I was. Then why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe? Because you were mine. She stood up, her voice breaking. You were my daughter in every way that mattered. I fed you, I clothed you. I sat up with you when you were sick. I taught you to read. I held you when you cried. Catherine gave birth to you, but I raised you. I loved you. You were my child. Where is she? The question came out as a sob. Where is Catherine? Is she alive? My mother's face crumpled. She died, baby. She died in 1975. She was in a state hospital in Georgia. Her mind, it never got better. She spent years in and out of institutions. The letters stopped because she stopped being able to write them. And then one day we got a call. She had passed away in her sleep. A heart defect they didn't know about. I left my parents' house that day and didn't speak to my mother for 3 months. I was devastated, furious, betrayed. My entire identity had been a lie. The woman who raised me wasn't my mother. The Anne I never met was. And she had spent years begging to see me, begging for a relationship with her own daughter, while the woman I called Mama kept me from her. Those 3 months of silence were the hardest of my life. Thomas tried to comfort me, tried to help me understand Dorothy's perspective, but I couldn't hear it. All I could think about was Catherine, this woman whose blood ran through my veins, whose face I had never seen, whose voice I had never heard. My real mother, kept from me by people who claimed to love me. I became obsessed with finding out who Catherine Sullivan was. I spent hours at the library, searching through old newspaper archives. I called the state hospital in Georgia where she had died, requesting any records they could release. I hired a private investigator to track down anyone who might have known her. I needed to understand the woman who had given birth to me, the woman whose letters had been filled with such desperate love. What I discovered broke my heart in new ways I didn't know were possible. Catherine Sullivan was born in 1941, the youngest of 3 children. My father, Robert, was the oldest. Then there was a middle brother named James who died in Korea. Catherine was described by her high school teachers as brilliant but fragile, a girl who seemed to live half in this world and half in some other place. She wrote poetry, painted watercolors, and had episodes where she would disappear for days, later found wandering downtown Charleston in a confused state. When she was 17, she became pregnant. The investigator couldn't find any record of who the father was. Catherine never told anyone, or if she did, no one wrote it down. In 1958, being an unwed teenage mother was a scandal that could destroy a family's reputation. My grandparents, Catherine's parents, were devout church people, pillars of their community. They couldn't bear the shame. So they sent Catherine away to a home for unwed mothers in North Carolina. She gave birth to me there on February 14th, 1958. Valentine's Day. My real birthday, though Dorothy and Robert had always told me it was February 10th, the day they brought me home and registered my birth as their own. According to the records I found, Catherine held me for 3 days after I was born. 3 days where she fed me, sang to me, whispered promises she would never be able to keep. The matron at the home wrote in her notes that Catherine refused to let the baby out of her sight, that she slept with me in her arms, that she cried constantly and talked about running away. On the 3rd day, Dorothy and Robert arrived. They had traveled to North Carolina with legal papers already prepared. Catherine was a minor. Her parents had given permission for the adoption, though it wasn't technically an adoption. Dorothy and Robert simply registered me as their biological child. No courts, no official records, just a birth certificate with Dorothy's name where Catherine's should have been. The matron's notes described the moment they took me from Catherine's arms. She screamed. She fought. She had to be sedated. 2 nurses held her down while my father carried me out of the room, with Dorothy following behind, her arms empty, but soon to be full. Catherine was committed to her first psychiatric hospital 2 weeks later. The trauma of losing me had triggered a complete breakdown. She spent the next 17 years moving between institutions, halfway houses, and brief stays with her parents, who died within a year of each other in 1970. During all those years, she wrote letters. Hundreds of letters to Dorothy and Robert, begging to see her daughter, begging for just one visit, one photograph, one word about how I was doing. Dorothy kept every letter. She never answered a single one. She never sent a photograph. She never allowed Catherine to see me, not even once. I found one letter that Catherine had written when I was 10 years old. My investigator discovered it in the hospital archives. She had written, "Dear Dorothy, I know you must hate me for writing again. I know you think I'm trying to take her from you. I'm not. I could never do that. You're her mother now, in all the ways I couldn't be. But please, I'm begging you, just let me see her once. Just once. I want to see what she looks like. Does she have my eyes? Does she like to read? Is she happy? I think about her every single day. Every morning when I wake up, the first thing I think is she's 10 years old today, or she's starting 5th grade, or it's her birthday. I count every day we've been apart. Please don't punish her for my mistakes. Please let me be a part of her life, even just a small part. I promise I won't cause trouble. I promise I'll be good. I'm taking my medicine now. The doctors say I'm doing better. Please, Dorothy. Please." When I read that letter, I wept for hours. I wept for Catherine, for the young girl who had her baby torn from her arms. I wept for the woman who spent 17 years in institutions, counting the days, wondering about the daughter she would never know. I wept for myself, for the chance I never had to know my real mother, to tell her I turned out okay, to let her know she hadn't failed me. But I also felt something else. Something darker. Anger. Rage. Because Dorothy had kept all of this from me. She had made the choice, over and over again, for 45 years, to let me believe a lie. She could have told me when I was 18. When I was 25. When I had my own children. At any point, she could have given me the truth. But she chose her comfort over my right to know who I was. I confronted her again, this time with all the evidence I had gathered. I brought the hospital records, the investigator's report, Catherine's letters. I laid them all out on her dining room table. That same table where we had shared so many Sunday dinners, where she had taught me to roll pie crust, where I had done my homework as a child. Did you know she begged to see me? Did you know she spent 17 years asking about me? Dorothy's hands shook as she looked at the papers. She had aged in the 3 months since our last conversation. Her hair seemed grayer, her face more lined. I know. Then why? Why didn't you let her see me? Why didn't you at least send her a photograph? Because I was afraid. Her voice was small, defeated. I was afraid that if you knew about her, you would choose her. I was afraid you would see me as the woman who stole you instead of the woman who raised you. I was afraid of losing you. So you let her suffer? You let her die without ever knowing her own daughter. I did what I thought was right. Dorothy stood up, her eyes flashing with something between defiance and desperation. Catherine was sick, Margaret. Really sick. She heard voices. She saw things that weren't there. She tried to hurt herself more than once. What kind of mother would I have been if I had let you be exposed to that? What if she had hurt you? What if seeing you had made her worse? That wasn't your decision to make alone. She was my mother. I was your mother. Dorothy slammed her hand on the table. I was the one who walked the floor with you when you had colic. I was the one who nursed you through chicken pox and measles. I was the one who taught you to tie your shoes and braid your hair. I was the one who sat up with you when you had your first heartbreak. Catherine gave birth to you, but I mothered you. Don't I count for anything? And there it was. The heart of it. Dorothy had loved me. She had raised me well. She had given me a stable, loving home that Catherine, in her condition, never could have provided. But she had also robbed me of my identity, of my history, of the chance to know where I came from. You count for everything, I said quietly. But so did she. And you should have found a way to honor both truths. I left that day and spent weeks in a fog. My own children noticed something was wrong. Emily, now 22 and working as a nurse, sat with me one afternoon and asked what was happening. So I told her. I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "So Grandma Dorothy isn't really my grandmother?" Biologically, no. But she raised me. She loved me. In every way that matters, she's your grandmother. Emily nodded slowly. And Catherine would have been my great-grandmother if she had lived. Yes. Mom, do you wish you had known her? The question pierced me. Every single day since I found out, baby. Every single day. The months that followed were a journey I had to walk alone, even though Thomas and my children wanted to help carry the burden. This was my identity, my history, my pain to sort through. I spent countless hours thinking about Catherine, about Dorothy, about what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a daughter. I visited Catherine's grave in Georgia. It was a simple marker in a cemetery for the indigent, those who died with no family to claim them, no money for proper burials. Just a small stone with her name and dates. Catherine Marie Sullivan, 1941 to 1975. She was only 34 years old when she died. Younger than I was when I discovered the truth. I stood at that grave and talked to her. I told her about my life, about her granddaughter and grandson, about the teacher I became, about the husband who loved me, about the garden I kept that reminded me of the one Dorothy tended with such devotion. I told her I was sorry. Sorry that I never knew her. Sorry that she suffered alone. Sorry that I couldn't tell her I turned out okay. And then I cried. I cried for the girl who held her baby for 3 days and had her ripped away. I cried for the woman who spent 17 years in hospitals, writing letters that went unanswered. I cried for all the moments we never got to share, birthdays, graduations, my wedding day, the birth of my children. I cried for the grandmother my children never knew. When I came home, I knew I had to make a decision about Dorothy. I could cut her out of my life completely, punish her for the choice she made 45 years ago. Or I could find a way to forgive her, to understand that she was human, flawed, doing what she thought was best even when it was wrong. But before I could make that decision, Dorothy made one of her own. She called me one evening, her voice weak and trembling. "Margaret, I need to see you. There's something else. Something I should have told you from the beginning, but I was too ashamed." My heart sank. What else could there possibly be? I drove to her house the next morning. She was sitting in her living room, the same room where I had played as a child, where we had decorated Christmas trees and celebrated birthdays. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by age and guilt. "I didn't tell you the whole truth about Catherine," she began without preamble. "About why she got pregnant, about who the father was." I felt my chest tighten. "Who was it?" Dorothy's hands twisted in her lap. "Your father, Robert. Your father was also Catherine's brother, but before you were born, before Catherine got pregnant, Robert and I had been married for 5 years. We were desperate for a child. The miscarriages had destroyed me, destroyed us. And Catherine, she was so young, so beautiful, so troubled. She had one of her episodes, and she developed a fixation on Robert. She thought he was someone else, someone from her dreams or delusions. And one night, she couldn't continue. She covered her face with her hands. "Are you telling me that my father—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too horrible. "No." Dorothy looked up sharply. "No, Robert never touched her. Never. But there was a young man, a neighbor's son named David Foster. He was kind to Catherine, patient with her when she had her spells. They had a brief relationship before she was hospitalized again. He was the father, Margaret. But his family sent him away when they found out Catherine was pregnant. They wanted nothing to do with the scandal. He joined the Navy and we never heard from him again. Then why did you start with father? Because I need you to understand how desperate we were. When Catherine got pregnant, my first thought, God forgive me, my first thought was that this was my answer. My prayer had been answered, just not in the way I expected. Your father's sister was carrying a baby that would be our niece or nephew. But we could make it our daughter. We could raise you as our own, and no one would know the difference. We could give you everything Catherine couldn't. And I convinced myself it was the right thing, the merciful thing, for everyone involved. Except Catherine. Except Catherine, she agreed, her voice breaking. I told myself she was too sick to be a mother, that taking you was an act of love for both of you. But the truth is, I wanted you. I wanted a baby so desperately that I was willing to take you from a 17-year-old girl who loved you with everything she had. I was willing to let her suffer for 17 years, writing letters I never answered, begging for just one glimpse of you. I chose my happiness over hers. And I've lived with that guilt every single day of your life. She reached into a drawer beside her chair and pulled out a photograph I had never seen. It was Catherine, young and beautiful, holding a newborn baby. Me. The photo was taken in the maternity home, probably during those 3 days before I was taken from her. Catherine's face was radiant with love and terror, joy and grief, all mixed together. She was looking down at me with such tenderness that it made my heart ache. I kept this hidden all these years, Dorothy said. But you should have it. You should know what she looked like when she held you. You should know that she loved you. I took the photograph with shaking hands. Catherine did have my eyes. The same green, the same shape. And she had my nose, my chin, my hands. Looking at her was like looking into a mirror that showed me a version of myself I never got to know. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I'm dying, Margaret. Dorothy's voice was calm, resigned. The doctor found cancer. Pancreatic. It's spread too far for treatment. I have maybe 3 months, maybe less. And I need you to know the truth before I go. All of it. I need you to understand that what I did was both loving and selfish, right and wrong. I gave you a good life, but I stole something from you that I had no right to take. Your mother, your history, your truth. The anger I had been carrying for months drained away, replaced by a crushing sadness. Oh, Mama, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she continued. I know I made choices that hurt you, that hurt Catherine, that can never be undone. But I need you to know that every single day I spent raising you was the greatest gift of my life. You were my daughter. You are my daughter. Not because of biology, but because I loved you from the moment I held you. And if I had to do it all over again, she stopped, tears streaming down her face. I want to say I would do it differently. I want to say I would find a way to honor Catherine's place in your life. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I was capable of that kind of generosity. And that's something I'll have to answer for when I meet my maker. I sat down beside her and took her hand. It was thin and frail, the hand that had braided my hair, wiped my tears, taught me to sew. You were my mother, I said quietly. You are my mother. Catherine gave me life, but you raised me. You taught me to be who I am. And yes, you made a terrible choice. You kept me from knowing my birth mother, and that's something I'll always grieve. But you also loved me. You gave me a home, a family, and education, everything I needed to become the woman I am. That counts for something. That counts for everything. Can you forgive me? I thought about Catherine, about the letters, about the 17 years she spent hoping and waiting and never giving up. I thought about Dorothy, about the barren woman so desperate for a child that she convinced herself taking one was an act of mercy. I thought about myself, about my own children, about the choices we make out of love and fear and desperate need. I don't know, I answered honestly. I don't know if I can forgive you for keeping Catherine from me. But I can forgive you for being human, for being flawed, for doing something terrible for reasons that made sense to you at the time. And I can thank you for loving me, even if that love was complicated and imperfect. Dorothy died 6 weeks later. I sat with her at the end, holding her hand, telling her it was okay to let go. My children came to say goodbye. Thomas stayed by my side. And when she took her last breath, I felt both grief and relief. Grief for the mother who raised me. Relief that her burden of guilt was finally lifted. After Dorothy's funeral, I went through her belongings. In the back of her closet, I found a large box I had never seen before. Inside were hundreds more letters from Catherine. Letters I hadn't known existed. But there was something else too. A journal. Dorothy's journal, spanning 45 years. I almost didn't read it. Part of me wanted to leave her secrets buried with her. But I needed to understand. I needed to see the full picture of the woman who raised me and the choices she made. The journal entries were heartbreaking. Dorothy wrote about the miscarriages, about the physical pain and the emotional devastation. She wrote about feeling like a failure as a woman, as a wife. She wrote about praying for a child, in any way God would provide. And then she wrote about the day Robert told her Catherine was pregnant. Finally, she had written, God has answered my prayers. This is my chance. My only chance. But as the years went on, the entries changed. She wrote about the guilt that ate at her. She wrote about reading Catherine's letters and crying herself to sleep. She wrote about watching me grow up and wondering if I had Catherine's gift for poetry, her artistic soul, her fragile beauty. She wrote about nearly telling me the truth a dozen times, but always stopping herself out of fear. One entry, written when I was 16, said, Margaret asked me today why we don't have any relatives on Robert's side. I told her they had all passed away. Another lie to add to the mountain of lies. Sometimes I look at her, and I see Catherine staring back at me, and I wonder if I stole this girl's life or saved it. I'll never know the answer. But God help me, I love her as if she were my own. Perhaps that's the greatest sin of all, that I don't regret taking her, even knowing what it cost Catherine. The final entry was written 3 days before she told me about the cancer. I'm dying, and I'm terrified. Not of death, but of dying with this secret. Margaret has a right to know who she is. Catherine deserved better than what I gave her. I need to tell the truth before it's too late. I need to ask for forgiveness, even though I don't deserve it. Even though I know it will break my daughter's heart. I closed the journal and cried. For Dorothy, who lived 45 years carrying the weight of what she had done. For Catherine, who died never knowing her daughter. For myself, for the complicated grief of losing one mother while still loving another. For the mess of love and lies that families can become. Today, I'm 68 years old. 23 years have passed since I learned the truth about who I am. My children are grown with families of their own. Thomas and I are still together, still loving each other through all the complications life brings. And I've spent these years trying to make peace with my story. I had Dorothy buried next to my father, as she wished. But I also traveled to Georgia and had Catherine's remains moved to Charleston, to the same cemetery. I bought her a proper headstone, one that reads, Catherine Marie Sullivan, beloved mother, 1941 to 1975. You were never forgotten. I visit both graves. Dorothy's, where I bring camellias from the garden I planted in her honor. And Catherine's, where I leave poems and paintings, the things she loved, the gifts she never got to share with me. My children know the whole story now. They understand that families are complicated, that love doesn't always look the way we think it should, that people make impossible choices for reasons that make sense to them even when they're wrong. Emily named her daughter Catherine Dorothy, honoring both women, acknowledging that both were my mothers in different ways. I've learned that there are no simple answers when it comes to family. Dorothy loved me deeply, but that love led her to do something that caused tremendous pain. Catherine loved me desperately, but her illness meant she couldn't provide the stable home I needed. Both truths exist together, and neither cancels out the other. I spent 45 years not knowing who I really was. And when I finally learned the truth, it broke me open. But here's what I've come to understand. Identity isn't just about biology. It's about the hands that held you when you were sick, the voice that read you bedtime stories, the heart that worried when you were late coming home. It's about the love that shapes you, even when that love is imperfect. Dorothy was my mother. She raised me, taught me, loved me, flawed as she was. Catherine was my mother too. She gave me life, grieved for me, never stopped hoping to know me. I am the daughter of both women, one who gave me breath, one who gave me wings. And I carry both of them with me every day. The truth did set me free, but not in the way I expected. It didn't erase the pain of the lies. It didn't bring Catherine back. It didn't make Dorothy's choices right. But it gave me something precious. The knowledge that I was loved, deeply loved, by two women who both sacrificed in different ways. One sacrificed her child, the other sacrificed her peace. Both did it out of love, however misguided or selfish or complicated that love might have been. If this story touched your heart the way it still touches mine all these years later, please leave a like to let me know I'm not alone in this complicated grief. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories I'll share from my heart to yours. And please, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew about your family? Have you had to forgive someone for loving you in a flawed, imperfect way? I'm so grateful you spent this time with me today, listening to the story I carried in silence for so many years. Remember, families are made of secrets and sacrifices, of love and lies, of perfect moments and terrible mistakes. But at the end of the day, what matters most is not the blood that runs through our veins. It's the love that runs through our lives. Some truths break us. Some truths remake us. And some truths do both at the same time. I learned that I had two mothers. One who held me for 3 days and 17 years of hope, and one who held me for 45 years of lies and love. And somehow, impossibly, I was the daughter of both. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, the truth may hurt, but living without it hurts more. Until next time, may you find peace with your own complicated truths. This is Margaret Rose Sullivan, reminding you that we are all more than our secrets, and love, however imperfect, still counts for something.